Hello, folks. Please, thank you. Sit down. Thank you. Please be seated. Paul, if my mom were here, she'd wonder who in the hell you were talking about. My dad would have believed it. But thank you very, very, very much for the introduction. Paul, another guy here, Congressman Jerry Connolly, worked for me early on and saved me from at least 40% of the mistakes I would have otherwise made. Paul's been a great, great friend and someone I have relied on for advice and guidance, and I mean this sincerely, since the day he worked for me and the day he left. I take full responsibility for Paul's great success. And Jerry's as well. Good to see you, Congressman. Koki, it's great to see you. When he was talking about the panel's following, I thought he was going to say, and you'll get an ample opportunity to critique Biden's speech. But it's great to see you. If Koki's mom was a wonderful friend to me and took care of me, and if my dad were here, she'd look at you and say, "You got good blood, kid. You got good blood." And I also want to thank Steve. Steve, thank you for all the work you've done. You've helped me throughout my career. You helped me early on when we were doing the Boys and Girls Clubs and getting computers and a whole range of things into underprivileged kids. You made significant contributions. And by the way, it's making a gigantic difference. I think it's one of the reasons why we have, for the first time, the highest graduation rate in history for Hispanics and African Americans, and it's in no small part because what you personally insisted be done. And I also want to thank you for your work on cancer. Like for you, like for me, I know it's personal to you. And your cooperation with our effort on the moonshot is truly appreciated and quite frankly needed. I need your advice. I'm absolutely confident that we can, in fact, in the next 5 years, do what otherwise would take 10 years. We break down some of these silos and begin to move. And there's a new sense of urgency that's happening out there. Things are actually beginning to change. When we declared the war on cancer, we neither had the Army, the soldiers, the equipment, or the technology to deal with it. But what I'm sure Steve learned, and all of you who have a brush with cancer, anyone who you love who is in serious trouble, you try to learn as much as you can about the subject as quickly as you can. And I was amazed to learn when Bo became ill and was essentially given a death sentence of saying he had stage 4 glioblastoma. I tried to learn everything I could, and I didn't realize that only in the last 5 to 6 years have there been the kind of cooperation, coordination, and capacity that we have now. We actually have immunologists who are no longer that foreign, that sort of cult out there viewed by most cancer researchers. We find ourselves in a position where virologists are working with chemical engineers and biological engineers. I mean, we are at an inflection point, and I am really optimistic. And Steve, I'm not being solicitous here. I need your help, and I appreciate the offer of help. And David, it's great to be at the Smithsonian. This is one of the great national treasures. I mean, it really is. It's a perfect venue to talk about the next chapter in America's future. And I'd like to compliment Paul and the entire team at A.T. Kearney for the first-rate report about the possibilities of our country over the next decade as we approach the 250th anniversary of our independence. You know, I've been doing this job a long time. I've always been referred to as an optimist. When I got here, I was the young idealist, 29-year-old. And Paul, we were young when we started to work together. But I can say without hesitation, I give you my word as a Biden, I'm more optimistic about America's prospects today than I've been in my entire career, which I'll speak to a little bit in a moment. As Vice President, and by the way, I'm late because I am Vice President. When the President calls, you do the things he'd like you to do. So that V in front of my name is the reason why I caused your program to have to be, as they say, as my uncle used to kid, stood on its head. I apologize. But as vice president, I have, before being vice president and chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, I've traveled a lot around the world. I've gotten to literally meet, not because I'm important, just because of the nature of my job, every major world leader in the last 35 years. And a lot of the people who are running the show in their countries now are people that I knew when they were parliamentarians. And I'm on a first-name basis. It doesn't make it good or bad. It means that I actually know them and understand, I think, some of their motives. I've traveled more than 1,200,000 miles since being vice president. I've met with CEOs of the biggest companies and philanthropists, and I've often cite A.T. Kearney as I go around the world. I mean this sincerely. Your annual survey of leading executives around the world, where you ask them what's the best place in the world to invest, well, the last 3 years, by a margin larger than any time you've been doing the survey, they say the United States of America. And there's overwhelming consecutive 4 years where businesses say they want to invest here. Your children and my grandchildren are going to hear the word insourcing more than we heard the word outsourcing, if we're smart. If we're smart. You know, folks, there's a reason why folks are coming home. And the reason why they want to invest here. It's not because of Barack Obama or Joe Biden or any particular policy. Hey, Mike, how are you? Mike Kotzel, he was a great friend and helped me a great deal. It's great to see you, pal. I call him the double doc. It's a long story, but at any rate. There's a reason for it. We have and will have for the remainder of this century the cheapest energy and the most abundant energy in the world. It's in North America. It's not in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula or any other place in the world. We have, because of a really underrated, I think, one of the great presidents of all our time, Dwight D. Eisenhower, we made an investment during Sputnik that he rejected the wise man recommendation. We invested in research universities. We have the greatest research universities in the world. And all others have great research universities, but we have more than all the rest of the world combined. That's not hyperbole, that's just a fact. It's a fact. We also have the most productive workers in the world. American workers are 3 times as productive workers in Asia, and we have a legal system that honors contracts, supports and protects intellectual property, and where you can actually adjudicate differences that you have. And in addition to that, we have the most agile venture capitalists in the world. That's the reason why we have such incredible opportunities. But it didn't feel that way or look that way when we took office, in the middle of the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression. Over the past 8 years, we made some very tough and very unpopular decisions to pull the economy out of the depths of crisis into recovery, and now, as your report implies, on the verge of resurgence. This is a gigantic opportunity we have. But to make resurgence permanent, to build the future we want, we need to begin to focus on the very issues raised in your report. We're at an inflection point, to use that phrase twice today. A point in our history, I had a high school physics teacher who defined an inflection point for us. I remember, I hated physics, but I can remember him saying that an inflection point is you're riding down the highway at 60 miles an hour, both hands on the steering wheel, you abruptly turn 6, 8, 10 degrees in one direction, you can never get back on the path you were on before. Well, again, we are, as I'm always, as Paul used to kid me, and Jerry, I'm always quoting, Jerry didn't kid me, he agreed with me, I'm always quoting Irish poets. They think it's because I'm Irish. It's not for that reason. It's because they're the best poets in the world. And William Butler Yeats wrote a poem called Easter Sunday, 1916, and he talked about the first rising, the 100th anniversary just occurred. I was there for it in Ireland. And he used the line to describe his Ireland in 1916 that I think better describes the world we have today than it did his Ireland then. He said, all's changed, changed utterly. A terrible beauty has been born. All has changed in the last 15 years. All has changed. And it can be terrible or beautiful. Our hands are on the wheel. If we are smart, this is one of the rare moments in history where we can bend history just a little bit. And I mean that sincerely. We have a chance. You can't change history when things are static. But we're at a point of change. And if we're smart, your report makes a lot of excellent points. But let me, there are several in particular that I think stand out. You point out that enduring prosperity is within our grasp. We need to make the right choices to achieve it. The stakes are enormous. As you point out in your report, $5.1 trillion hinges in the balance. We can quibble over it's 5.1 trillion or 7 trillion or 4 trillion, but a great deal hangs in the balance. Our social and economic future depends critically on our leadership today. To highlight the importance of millennials addressing the challenge of their declining wages and falling wealth, you point out that millennials have 43% less wealth compared to their counterparts 20 years ago. Talk about how a double whammy of low wage growth and high student debt, how it threatens the American dream of today's young people, how an economy that runs on consumption cannot thrive if its consumers are left behind. And the spending patterns are changing because of the nature and impact of the recession. You talk about maintaining our technological edge, out-investing our competitors in R&D, STEM education, education generally. My wife, who in this town, as you know, I'm known as Jill's husband. My wife, who is a full-time professor, a community college professor, has never stopped teaching. I think she's the first full-time employee, private sector employee as the first lady, but right now she's out in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, working with the mayor, talking about a community college program they're trying to put together. She has an expression. She says, any nation that out-educates us will out-compete us. Does anybody here think in 2016, 12 years of education is enough? Does anybody think that? What in the hell are we doing? You note the importance of the energy sector. America is leading the way into the next century as the leading source of oil and natural gas. But there is a delicate balance between our energy prices, investment in energy production, environmental concerns, and you clearly state the importance of geopolitical stability. Living in the world is not just economically stable, but politically and socially stable as well. We can enjoy decades of stability and growth, or we can languish into mediocrity. And I'm optimistic that we will prevail, as we have time and again. The next generation will actually have a higher standard of living than we've ever had before. It's within our grasp. We've just got to clear the way of some of the rubbish that is left behind here. The future is not our automatic, that's not our automatic destiny. You all know it better than I do. We have to build it. We have to build it. And quite frankly, one of the biggest problems I have with my political opposition, and some are Democrats as well as Republicans, is they fail to understand the American people, given a chance, can do extraordinary things. They have never, ever, 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 ever let their country down. I really mean that. But there's this growth in some in the new generation of Democratic leadership as well as Republicans. An elitism that somehow concludes that ordinary people can't know what's in their interest. They're a hell of a lot smarter than we give them credit for. The reason why women don't go out and take a minimum wage job, the reason they don't take a minimum wage job is they have child care that exceeds anything they can make. They're pretty good at basic economics. But before we talk about how to achieve prosperity, the future laid out by your report, we need to acknowledge the remarkable progress we've made in the recent past. It's not about Barack and me. It's about the grit of the American people. Think back 8 years. When we took office, our economy was in free fall. I remember that the former chairman of the Fed and 50 economists we put together during the transition period on that 68th floor out in a building in Chicago where we met for almost 3 months in that interregnum period. I remember the first presentation they made. They came in and Volcker started off by saying, I'm paraphrasing, he said, Mr. President, we thought the first piece of advice we're going to have you is declare a bank holiday. We don't think you're going to have to do that. Remember the stock market? Was it going to fall below 6,000? Before we put our hands on the Bible, before I lowered my hand, 700,000 jobs had already been lost in January. Over 800,000 before the month was over. There was talk of another depression. The president, I knew we had to make some very difficult, unpopular decisions. And we did. We came up with the Recovery Act, the single largest stimulus in history of any country in the world. $831 billion spent in 18 months. At the end of the day, the Government Accountability Office, the gold standard of auditing, reported that less than 0.2% was waste or fraud or abuse. Even the vaulted School of Economics at the University of Chicago, not known as the liberal bastion, surveyed, and I believe the number was 87% of the economists last year concluded that it was the right, necessary thing to do. We've grown 20 times as fast as our competitors who rejected stimulus. We rescued an iconic industry. Critics said that we'd never sell more than 6 million cars again in America. Last year, and we extended a lifeline to auto workers. And by the way, they were viewed, remember the argument, as the most non-productive people in the world. Remember that, all that comparison to the Japanese and the Germans? They were paid too much. Auto workers made incredible sacrifices. The auto workers made incredible sacrifices to save the industry. And the ingenuity of the management of the automobile companies kicked back in a way we hadn't seen in a while. We saved 1 million jobs, and in the process created another 671,000, the fastest growth on record. These are good paying jobs, the middle class jobs, generated a virtuous cycle. Let me define what I mean by middle class. I got a really first-rate economist with me. Ben's here with me tonight, and I got a lot of economists work for me. These are Rhodes Scholars, Marshall Scholars, etc. And you say middle class, they'll say $52,100 or $51,870. It's not a number. It's a value set, Cokie. It's a value set. It's being able to send your kid to a park where you know they're going to come home safely. It's being able to own your house and not have to rent it if you want to. It's being able to send your kid to a local high school that if they work hard, they can get into college. And if they get to college, you can figure out how to get them there. It's being able to take care of one geriatric parent after the other one passes away and hope your children never have to take care of you. That's a middle class. I know in Washington I'm referred to as middle class Joe. That's not meant as a compliment. It means I'm not sophisticated. I'm a hell of a lot more sophisticated than the people who criticize me, and besides, I know a lot about the middle class. It is the glue that holds the social and political fabric of this country together. I've spent more time with President Xi than any world leader. I've had over 20, they tell me in state, I've had over 25 hours of private dinners with him, just he and I and interpreters. I was in Chengdu with him, traveling 18,000 miles with him in China. He looked at me during the dinner, he said, "Can you define America for me?" And Jerry said, "Yeah, it's easy, one word, possibilities. Possibilities." That's the defining, distinguishing feature of who we've been. The notion that there's a basic bargain, that if you play by the rules, you work hard, you contribute to the prosperity of the enterprise you're with, you get to share in the benefits. That bargain's been broken. But back to the auto industry. Went from selling 6 million cars to 17.5 million motor vehicles last year, the most in all of history. We passed sweeping financial reform, told we were going to ruin Wall Street. We stabilized Wall Street. We stabilized the financial industry. Dodd-Frank was a rational way to regulate what had been the best allocator of capital in the history of the world, Wall Street, to promote financial stability, to protect working Americans from predatory practices. Does it need constant alteration? Yeah. Were the things we could have done we didn't do? Were the things we did we shouldn't have done? On the margin, yeah. But it was critically important. In short, we prevented another crash. And we knew the driver of national debt. All you had to do is, I've spent too much time in that damn budget committee. All you had to do, look at the numbers. The driver of national debt, the single biggest driver, was healthcare cost to the federal government. The single biggest driver. And we believe from the beginning, not only the principle that healthcare is a right, not a privilege, but just like basic education, 12 years of school is a basic right, not a privilege here. So we passed the Affordable Care Act. Does it need to be fixed? Yeah. Does it need alteration? Yeah. If we just have somebody to actually sit down and constructively work with us. But it drove down the growth of healthcare costs to its lowest level in half a century. More has to be done. But 20 million people previously uninsured are covered. And now we have the lowest uninsured rate in the history of the country. And you know what we did even more importantly? We gave millions of people, like the people I was raised in my neighborhood, peace of mind. How many people do you know before this were going to bed staring at the ceiling? Literally, not figuratively, thinking, my God, if she gets breast cancer, if I have a heart attack, we lose everything. We lose everything. Peace of mind matters in a democracy. Peace of mind matters, and it impacts on growth and productivity, in my view. It's not measurable, but it's real. Because of those decisions and the grit and determination of the American people, and some very difficult votes a lot of your colleagues had to cast and lost their seats because they cast them. Unemployment is below 5%. Real wages are growing again. Finally, 1.5 million private sector jobs, 78 months. We've created more jobs than every other industrialized country in the world combined. Combined. And our deficits have slashed by 3/4. $32 trillion in wealth was added since we took office. Housing is back on track, 8 million households out from underwater. And just this week, a new report from the Census Department showed the typical household income is up $2,800 last year alone, setting an all-time record for growth for middle income and working families. And 3.5 million people moved out of poverty. I've had it up to here with talking about how we've increased poverty and things have gotten worse. It's simply, factually not true. The poverty rate fell faster than any point since 1968. It's not because of Barack and me, it's because of the grit of the American people. But to make this resurgence permanent, to build a future envisioned by your report, we have to make several concrete policy steps, some of them difficult, just like the decisions we made early on. But now we're dealing with resurgence, not dragging the car out of the ditch. It's up and running, the tires inflated, it's going 45 miles an hour, but it has the capacity to go 70 miles an hour, to use a hackneyed analogy or metaphor. We have to increase access to affordable education and job training, from free community college to apprenticeships to job training. And by the way, I love how our critics talk about how they support productivity and growth. Give me a break. I'm not joking. I realize, look, no one ever doubts I mean what I say. The problem is I sometimes say all that I mean. But what the hell, I'm leaving. But it hadn't changed in 44 years. But here's the deal, guys. Take a look at this. We know, every report that I'm aware of, shows that if we have free community college, increasing the number of people in community college to 9 million, and in order to qualify, the college has to have a show that it has a graduation rate, shows that if there's job placement, has to be able to transfer all those credits to a state university. And you have to have a B average, you got to get in and you got to maintain it to stay, etc. But it shows if we do that, Every corporate leader I meet with, and many of you are corporate leaders of great renown, when anybody, whether you are, wherever you are in the political spectrum, you all say the same thing. What do we need most? A better educated workforce. Well, all the studies show if we do that, we'll increase productivity by 0.2%. That's $1 trillion over a decade. But it costs $6 billion a year. A lot of money. 60 billion over 10. So how do you pay for it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all know what stepped up basis is. I didn't, but I hope you qualify. It means if you buy stock for $1 million worth and it appreciates to $2 million, you're going to sell it. You pay capital gains less than your tax rate on the million. And guess what? If on your way to sell it, you drop dead and your kid inherits, you pay nothing. You know what that costs the Treasury every year? But they're good people. Wealthy people are just as patriotic as poor folks. It affects 0.3% of the population who are already very well off, don't need a new tax break, and it costs the Treasury $16 billion a year. And there's not 1 ounce of evidence that it increases productivity or growth. So who is in favor of increased productivity and growth? We got to stop apologizing for making rational choices. These are all choices we have to make. Look, folks, the fact is that in addition to that, when the president asked me, I always dread States of the Union, because at some point he turns and says, Joe will do it. You may remember a couple years ago he asked me to do a survey as to what the jobs of the future are going to be. We already knew 6 in 10 jobs. Now it's estimated to be more. Between now and 2020, you need more than a high school diploma. You don't need a graduate degree. You don't need 4 years of college. You don't necessarily even need 2 years. But you need more than 12 years. And so we found out basic things after meeting with a lot of you. We met with over 340, I think it was, CEOs of the Fortune 500, with labor organizations, universities, experts. We found out we need 500, I think it is 63,000 registered nurses by 2020. We need them now, actually. $65,000 a year. We need 1.2 million IT workers just knowing how to code. You know, because of Steve's help, high schools are starting to change, but there's only 2 states in the union allowed coding to be part of a science requirement in high school. There's now, I think, IT Global places people. When the exodus from Detroit occurred, all of the basic middle management moved out, the bureaucracy was hollowed out. They figured out as they were getting back off their back onto their feet, they needed 1,000 IT workers. So they put together a program. They went into the hood, literally the hood, the neighborhoods. They got 58, I think it was, women, all happened to be African American. Youngest 23, oldest 58. I think it was an 18-week course on coding. Everyone had a job. I went to that graduation. Lowest starting salary, $54,000, highest, $106,000. We need 1.2 million IT workers. I could go on down the list. The point is, not everybody needs a college degree. Not everybody even needs 2 years of college. But cognitive capability is replacing, as we all know, you know better than I do, brawn. And the very people who could shovel coal into a blast furnace, they have the cognitive capability to be able to learn how to code. They have a cognitive capability to learn how to understand photovoltaic technology in using the machinery on the factory floor to make solar panels. This is basic. And it's starting to pay off. That's why we invested in a lot of you businesses. You form partnerships. with these community colleges, the most flexible educational tool we have. We spent over $8 billion, but it's taken billions of dollars off the sidelines. We also have to guarantee the basic protection of workers, adequate overtime. You know, guys, you can't keep recalibrating what constitutes management. It ain't fair. It ain't fair. So we changed it, the rule. Paid leave, it matters. Sufficient minimum wage. Workplace protection. A voice found in unionization and collective bargaining, which still matters. Because the squeeze on workers and declining wages you cite, it's rooted in a labor market that doesn't always give workers a fair shot. We have to modernize our infrastructure. Two big things we got to do is folks come home. If you don't, we don't have the best educated workforce in the world, and the most modern infrastructure in the world. You all not staying. You're not coming home. We rank 27th in the world in terms of transportation infrastructure, the United States of America. I got in trouble initially when I was at LaGuardia, and I said, if I blindfolded you and took you into the lobby, the ticket area of LaGuardia in the middle of the night, 2 in the morning, and did the same thing in Beijing and asked you which is the developing country, you'd say LaGuardia. Well, everybody said, how could he say that? Guess what? I was right. Everybody from the mayor to the governor to the county executive, the people who worked at the airport, everybody. Immediately after responding, they weren't sure what to respond. I landed 4 days later at LaGuardia, an Air Force Two. And the pilot said, Mr. Vice President, sure it's safe to land? I went into the city, came out, and there were 9 guys and women standing at the bottom of the stairs, wearing, you know, the brown overall jackets with the yellow luminous stripe around it. And I figured, okay, here we go. Usually there's cops standing there to have their picture taken. And I walked up, and the first thing, a guy steps forward and says, I want to thank you, Mr. Vice President. You're right about this place. Well, they're investing $6 billion now. New York's the greatest city in the world. No offense to Washington or anywhere else. When I walked through LaGuardia, there was an escalator down and there was a sign at the top. It was, I think, in September, October. It said, will be repaired by January. Not the United States of America. I took a bunch of Republican governors and senators and congressmen down to the Panama Canal to see the 8th wonder of the world. You should see those new locks. They're breathtakingly capable. Carry twice as much cargo, 40% of the cost. There's only 3 ports in all, from Houston all the way to Maine, they can dock in. What the hell are we thinking? What are we thinking? We need resilient energy networks. Guys, you know, one of the smartest guys I know is Ernie Moniz. We're talking about having the national security implications to modernizing our infrastructure. It's not just energy, it's our infrastructure. It costs us billions and billions and billions of dollars a year. I know there's no global warming, there's no gravity either, but I know there's neither of those things. But what happens? Most of the power plants are built at sea level, along the ocean. We've got to change it. Incredible investments that we're capable of. Again, this is highlighting your report. American competitiveness depends critically on its infrastructure. We need a progressive, efficient tax code that eliminates wasteful tax expenditures and encourages economic growth. What are the rationale for tax expenditures, which I support? Either they're to promote a social good that society thinks is a social good, or to reward risk or reward productivity. I challenge any of you to justify more than $600 or $700 billion of the $1.3 trillion a year in tax expenditures we have now. Tell me They trump, no pun intended, investment in education or investment in infrastructure or investment in energy. Everything from a child care tax credit. Look, folks, most studies show, if you gave an $8,000 tax credit to people making under 60 grand, you'd put back in the workforce 750,000 women. Again, increasing productivity 0.4% over time. What makes sense? Tell me what makes sense. We need to maintain our position as the world epicenter of energy production, but we also have to price in, which you're already doing, many of you corporations, the cost of carbon into the business decisions you're making. Building an energy sector that protects the environment. It means investing in energy infrastructure that can sustain our role as the most important energy producer in the world. Infrastructure that can support good paying jobs. Already, solar power is the fastest growing form of energy, adding 10 times as many jobs as the rest of any other factor in the economy. Since the President and I took office, more jobs have been created in the solar industry than are employed by Google, Apple, and Twitter combined. They're very important organizations, outfits. It means investing in technology that will lead the way to renewable energy resolution. Clean energy technology is valuable, and the technology is exportable. We can make money, create jobs. We can only achieve this if we develop the technology today. And we have to cut back, as I said, on, we need a tax code that's more relevant to our needs, to pay for national priorities without eliminating those expenditures which make sense. We can do all these things, but my focus tonight is one step we need to take that among you corporate executives, my guess is, I've been around long enough. Barry Goldwater I served with. It's a long time. But Goldwater made famous the expression, in your heart you know I'm right. Well, my guess is in your heart you know what I'm about to say is right. And it doesn't get enough attention. We have to change the corporate culture in America. I come from the corporate state of America, the home of the Business Roundtable. Granted, a lot of it is shriveled in my state, but at the time, DuPont was the 7th largest corporation in the world. ICI Americas, Hercules, a number of other, AstraZeneca, a lot of big corporations. And we had a more rational corporate culture. We're not going to be able to make many of these critical decisions, these critical investments I talked about, unless we change from short-termism to long-termism. Short-termism happens when companies, executives, investors put short-term gains ahead of long-term investment. I may have told you this story a long time ago, Steve, but I remember one day standing waiting to get to 736 Metro South, and there was a 740 going north. And I'm standing on the platform 15 years ago with 2 major corporate executives in my state, different companies. I said, hey guys, how are you? Going to New York? She said, yeah, we're going for a day. And the one corporate executive said, I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm going up to speak to some snivel little SOB with a master's degree who works in a Wall Street firm. He's going to tell me unless I can guarantee him that I'll have profit the next quarter, he's going to downgrade my stocks. You know what that means, Joe? I'm going to have to lay off people in my research department. You know what that means, Joe? I have to cut boom, boom, boom. Any economist will tell you that investment, whether it's in training or research or factory and equipment, is a driver of growth. And we've seen the rise in roadblocks to investment that will ultimately have serious consequences, in my view, for the future of the country. And I'm not talking about returns for investors, although they will be hurt too eventually. I'm worried about workers who'll see stagnant productivity as investment funds dry up. I'm worried about wages that are clearly tied to how much a worker produces, which is not irrational. I'm worried about the U.S. commerce losing its edge. I want to be clear here. I'm not pointing the finger at CEOs. CEOs I've met in my career want to build enterprises, not sustain something that is gradually shrinking. So when I talk about fixing short-termism, I'm talking about government partnering with business to overcome the barriers of long-term growth. Before you can fix short-termism, you need to understand its origins. Some of the roots of short-termism are complicated and widespread, but a major part of the problem, at least by most studies recently, including the IMF and Standard & Poor's and others, is corporate buybacks. Some of you know the SEC chair under President Reagan changed the rules to encourage buybacks, and they proliferated. Between 2003 and 2012, 54% of the $2.7 trillion in profit, which should be made by the 444, I think it was, corporations that were in the Fortune 500 that entire time, went to buybacks. 54% went to buying back your own stock, 37% to dividends, leaving 9% for research, training, equipment, salaries, growth. Folks, we're never going to achieve the future prosperity that is so gallantly streaming the future laid out by A.T. Kearney if businesses are only investing 9% of the revenues. I realize this is an oversimplification. It's also the structure of executive compensation, not the level you make, the structure of executive compensation. You get paid in stock options because I voted for a silly idea President Clinton had to limit the maximum salary a corporate head could get was $1 million. You know, be careful what you vote for. Well, it's logical. Over 78% of you get the bulk of your payment in stocks. Bonuses are only paid if share prices rise. The bulk of compensation tied to share price. CEOs that I know, they don't want to be judged by share price. They got in the business to build companies, build something great, not just to get out checks to shareholders and increase their stock options. But you know what? The capitalist system has incentives. So you're sitting there as a CEO, why wouldn't you buy back your stock? Why wouldn't you do that? We've got to change the structure. And if we do, it's a win for everyone. We also have a tax code that exacerbates the problem. When it comes to capital gains, long-term is now defined as a year. It's the only place in all of America that long-term is a year. I guess pregnancy could be that if it were that long-term, but seriously. Since when can an executive invest in research or a new factory if the capital might get pulled out 12 months later? On top of this, we see a persistence of quarterly reporting pressure. Companies put out earning targets every 4 months. They get penalized if you don't hit them. Again, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm simply calling for a system that companies get rewarded for adding economic value. We need a playing field that's tilted toward long-termism, where capital flows from investors into companies, not the other way around. Where a tax code rewards long-term investment horizons, where CEOs can think and plan more than 3 months in advance. This is within our grasp. We've been there before. We need to change the culture. And it starts with changing policy. First, we need to take a hard look at buybacks, and especially the safe harbor provision put in 35 years ago. At least we have to debate it. You all should be debating it. Second, we need to change the way executives are paid. They should be rewarded for long-term prosperity. And third, we have got to ease the quarterly pressure on companies. Long-term metrics should be the norm, not the exception. And lastly, we have to examine our tax incentives for investors. Let's align the notion of long-termism with our tax rules. We've got momentum in this area, but we need to build on it. Business and government can partner because we're all working toward the same goal. I got a phone call from a group of 4 of the Fortune 20 company CEOs and 2 of the largest fund managers in the world. Could they come to my house and see me? I don't think any of them are Democrats. So we had a private meeting in my home. They asked me whether or not I'd be willing in this administration to lead the charge to begin to change the corporate culture. I met with CEOs on the topic from some that they don't mind my using their name, from Larry Fink to Richard Branson to Andrew Liveris and others. They're all telling me the same thing. We can do this. It just takes will. Folks, I'm more optimistic about American prospects, as I said earlier, today, and I mean this sincerely, than any time in my career. We are better positioned than any nation in the world to own the beginning of the 21st century. I've not met a single world leader who wouldn't trade places tomorrow, including from Beijing to Paris to Berlin, wherever. Because given a chance, as I said, here's the phrase I use when I speak with my friends as I travel around the world. I point out it's never, never, ever been a good bet to bet against America. It's never been a good bet. It's not a good bet now. But we just have to give. We have to give it a chance. And it starts with looking ahead, not to the next quarter, not to the next year. What's over the horizon? Where can we have genuine growth, real prosperity for the 250th anniversary and beyond? You've laid out what we have to look at. I hope at a minimum, what the report does is generate serious, serious debate, publicly and privately, among you business leaders who, as they say, brought us to the dance. We need you badly. We need you badly. But we need more critical analysis of why we are where we are and where we go from here. I'm absolutely confident with the leadership of the business community we can do that. I really mean it. Because y'all know we got to change. And again, think of where we are relative to any other country in the world. You want to trade places with China? I remember having a debate at the Wharton School back in the late 80s with a leading Republican think tanker about how Japan was going to own us. Remember that? And I pointed out, not a shot in the world, and I laid out why. And remember we started at the turn of this century how China was going to eat our lunch. Come on. How the EU, we could not compete with the EU. Raise your hand if you want to trade places with any one of those countries. No, I'm not joking. But it's because of you that we've been able to overcome the challenge that we face. So folks, the only thing I don't ask you to agree with me. Challenge what I said. Debate among yourself. What is it that's going to make the 250th anniversary gallantly streaming? The status quo will not pertain. I thank you for being gracious enough to listen, and again, I apologize for reordering your agenda, and God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.